Yeah, I'm my first year PhD in the curriculum and pedagogy. I'm from Six Nations of the Grand River, band member. I've lived off and on reserve there and in the city. Also a family in Wiki, unceded, and I'm also Scottish. But yeah, so I'm an RA with the Center for Indigenous Education Research at OISE, University of Toronto, and I'm here joined by Lois and Megan, fellow RAs, also working with the center, who are also supporting the event today. So welcome all to today's faculty speaker series talk with Dr. Evelyn Kipkosgei. It's great to see you all here. So just a note, this event will be recorded today, but you can let me or Lois know that like afterwards via chat or during via chat if anyone has issues with this, and we'll also make sure to edit accordingly. The recording will be shared on the CIER OEZ YouTube page and Deepening Knowledge Project website for later viewing. At the end of today's presentation, we will open up the floor for some Q&A and discussion. And right now, I'll hand it over to Lois for land acknowledgement.
Thanks, Miles, and hi, everyone. I would like to acknowledge the land where the University of Toronto operates, and also to invite anyone who's not in Toronto at the moment to reflect similarly within your own space. So the land that Toronto, or Toronto, sits upon carries the interconnected stories and histories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe nations. They offered assistance to the first European travelers to this territory and shared the necessary knowledge for survival on this land. Toronto today is the treaty land and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and it is on land governed by the Dish with One Spoon government agreement to share the land reciprocally between the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee nations. Of course, Toronto is also home today to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, as well as millions of others, settlers and arrivants who have come recently or not so recently, unwillingly or willingly to this land. So I think that acknowledging the land in this way, while just a very small start towards the work of reconciliation and tangible decolonizing work, does encourage reflection on how we are personally connected to the land and what our responsibilities are as a result. So, for instance, I situate myself personally on this land as a settler of European ancestry. As such, there are many ways that I have benefited from the violent colonial project on this land, a project which has worked for multiple centuries to dispossess Indigenous peoples of their homelands, cultures, and knowledges to instead impose settler European lifestyles and values. So it's necessary to recognize how this project is ongoing as well here and around the world as well. So this virtual space, I hope, is one of sharing, learning, connection, reflection, connecting across borders, time zones, all with the aims of deepening the work of Indigenous peoples at the front lines who are advocating for reciprocal and caring relationships with one another and with the land.
Great. Thanks for that, Lois. And with that said, I'm very pleased to present our speaker today, Dr. Kipkosgei. So just the bio, Dr. Kipkosgei is an assistant professor at OISE, specializing in social justice education. Her research interests encompass environmental justice, politics, Indigenous knowledge, decolonial focus, gender, critical race theories, and critical studies, with a focus on both Canadian and African contexts. So I will, yeah, you can carry it away, Dr. Kipkosgei.
Thank you, Miles. Thank you, Lois. Thank you, everyone who's present today. I appreciate your giving me this opportunity to share some of the things that I do in terms of research, my interests. Today, I'm focusing on my people. I situate myself as an immigrant, recent immigrant. I've been here for about 15 years. Before that, I had a very illustrious career somewhere else. And I changed my career to social justice education, sociology, because I have a lot of interest in the history of my people. So today I'll tell you about my tribe. It's called Tribe. In my country, I come from Kenya, and I'll show you the picture in a minute. That is Kenya, that's what it looks like. In the map of Africa, it's East Coast. Then my district is in red, as you see, and also in red down here. So we have one district of my tribe and another minority as well, but the red one is my interest today. So my people have been, as you can see, I've been trying to understand a century of dispossession. When the British made Kenya a colony and a district of the Britain in 1902, they ended up in my area where my people live. And it has been a lot of resilience, a lot of resourcefulness that has made them survive the enslavement and the repossession. That's a picture of a normal picture of where I come from. We come from a hilly, dry area. It was by choice at the beginning. My people decided to live there for different reasons. So this paper then, to put it in context of global and environmental crisis, I examined the colonial legacy, and that's a lot of the things that I'm grappling with my research. And then also what they did in the land of my ancestors. And I'll start by talking about the struggles as well of their livelihoods, what has happened, what has culminated in the tragedy of commons fatalism in terms of environmental destruction by the people themselves, and then the continued presence and interest by multinational corporations, mining companies in the extraction and destruction of the environment and in minerals resource such. So what have others said about this? What have people said about land dispossession? Alex Laguma and one other South African, these are South African authors. This person is a fiction writer, and he said that we have been told that we must go from our land. That's what we were told, and that's how we were dispossessed of our ancestors. But it's a very difficult thing to uproot an old oak of many years. The roots of such a tree are deep. Certainly, one can take an axe and cut down the tree. That's easy, but the roots remain and are very hard to dig up. So you see the tree remains, and the tree really remains, and it grows on and on and on. And this is now why I consider myself one of the people that are some of the roots. We are going back to the roots because it did not really get banished. So what are the theoretical, some of the theories that I use to understand the situations of my people is one named after, it was theorized by a different group of people, two people, but it's named after Kirk's Human Ecology. It's used to analyze, it provides a framework for analyzing the dynamic interactions between humans and the environment, highlighting the role of culture in shaping these relationships and emphasizing the importance of sustainable practices for both human well-being. Another one is spiritual ecology. I use that as well, and anti-colonial thought as described, but because it's used to understand your lived realities of the colonial subjects. This is my outline. I'll show you a topography of my roots and the land tenure system and the colonial infestations. That's what I'll call it, and the critical land question, because the colonizer was about land. The Spencer line, I'll explain what that would be, and so on and so forth. And then what has happened now? What's the way forward? So this Keiyo people is a sub-tribe of 42 tribes, but now it's bigger. It's about 46 now. They have original 42 tribes in Kenya. And these are the areas. We lived in 3 ecological zones. There's the valley that's dry. It's not where we practice nomadic pastoralism, beekeeping and growing of grains. And the middle zones that I showed you before, and I'll still show you in some of the pictures. This is the parts that have been referred to as hanging cliffs and the escarpments, where there's maize growing, livestock, and it was a choice. That's why I highlighted. So it's a choice of my people to live on this slopey area because it's cooler, free from mosquitoes, safety from raids, and drought, and of course, safety from colonialism later on, from the colonizer hiding. And so this was a choice. And the reason why I say that is because later on, they were banished back there now. But however, they had freedom at that time to move to the highlands. The other part is the highland area, which is known as the reserve, because it became reserve after colonization. But they had access to a plateau, large tracts of agricultural land, but they didn't live there. It was accessible to the animals, and just as the valley was also accessible for nomadic pastoralists, even this one. And it's the wealthiest part. It had rains, but it was not comfortable for my people based on their environmental needs. And that's where the entry point of the colonizers. Did you lose me? Okay, okay, all right. So here is the pre-colonial literature, just as an example, that this is the work that I'm trying to decolonize right now. Because if we do not deconstruct even a little bit of how our people are depicted, there's a man who was a district commissioner in 1922. His name was J.A. Mason, British. He was the district commissioner of Kenya district of the British. And he stayed among my people. I have a book that I've been walking around with for about 5 years now. I bought it from the University Library of Toronto. Apparently nobody needs it. So every time I take it, I ask them if it's on queue, they say no. And I had to get it from near Downs View because it has gone to the archives of the library. So I'm still holding on to it. Sometimes I take it, I read it, it tells me a lot of things. And says, this is the point of my departure. So this man, I got in his book, he made hateful language, hateful pathologizing or describing of the Keiyos as warriors, as the women as polyandrias. He talked about how they are famine ravaged. They like to live on the cliffs, and the book is called The Cliff Dwellers of Kenya. So that was to justify the colonial dispossession, pushing them back from their agricultural areas, plus their animals, and killing, and also arresting the wild animals, because our people are nomadic pastoralists. We look after cattle, we look after livestock, as many as we can, and we don't do it for business, and we don't have anything, but our wealth and our power comes from ownership and possession of animals. So most scholars who are interested in deconstructing start with this book, just to challenge the point of view at that time. Then, of course, he talked about the economic and social systems, cultural institutions in a language that he decided to do. And also about the secret societies, the lineages, the more and structural functionalism of my people. So the land for Keiyo, like many other people in our tribes and mostly in Kenya, is a very delicate and sensitive and emotive issue. And I think it's like that for all indigenous people around the world, because it's their source of life. We belong to the earth, we belong to land. That's what we eat. They feed us, and they take us back when we transition to the next life. So who was responsible for community displacements? The hanging police, the colonialists. They pushed them back. They're responsible for the conflict between the community and colonial state. Land. Land, because huge chunks of it was taken. First, taken for white settlers, which I may just explain here. The British found a very good land, huge tracts of land in what they call Yosengesho Plateau, where the Maasai tribe used to graze. But after they left, the British, the local communities near there, the Keiyos, Nandi, the Kalenjin people, used that space to graze their animals. But it was welcome, anyone was welcome to use it. So when the British arrived and noticed that there's a very good land, cool, beautiful climate, good rain, good for growing, cash crops, wheat, maize, everything, plantations, they took it up and wanted to settle the Jewish. The Jewish refused, or whatever happened. They wanted to settle them in that land. They went to South Africa and brought in the Boers. So the area there mostly has a lot of history connected to the Boers. So it settled in this area. And the British guys who were like Grogan, who was the Grogan were the top administrators in charge of repossession, brutality, enslavement against Black people. That was like almost that was his job description. In addition to taking the land, half of the land that could have remained, they converted into forests. And still a forest up till now. And we're still living at the edges of those forests. So in that sense, the Keiyo were forced to gravitate on precarious hanging escarpments. That's the ledges, which later on, which we'll talk about, led to the destruction of the fragile ecosystems as the populations arose. And they were banned from moving back to the Yosengesho Plateau. So under this coordination and they invited the South Africans, as I said, Sir Charles Elliot brought the Boers. The British government had monopoly of all the violence. So they murdered, killed, persecuted people. And the creation of this, then they created reserves like the one we see here. I think it was a colonial model of locking up people in one place. However, those reserves were not taken too far away because they needed an oversupply of the labor of people. They needed an oversupply of cheap labor to serve in their white settler farms. So people were enslaved. They could not move without a pass. They had labor contracts that you went and stayed forever there, underpaid. And then this led to the introduction of the squatter system, which was just akin to chattel slavery. But as I said, the resourcefulness and the resilience of the people made them benefit. They were smart enough to benefit from this squatter system because they introduced something like you're given some land to, you stay here full time and they give you some acreage for food production. And they were smart enough to keep it, save it, and eventually sold both these lands, inherited. So you get some of the big farms that were colonial farms now are owned by a few people from my community who worked at that time. So what are the tactics of this subjugation? If I just go a little bit in detail, these tactics were used to oppress, to humiliate and subdue Congo, the crown land ordinances, the capitalist estate production, tea, coffee, everything, wheat, maize introduction, establishment of African reserves and squatter system, the formation of the White Islands, where they resettled, and invited the Boers, and they followed them up to South Africa again and displaced them. And the imposition of taxes and a pass to move, missionary charges was another big culprit. Declaration of a state of emergency, all that, divide and rule, vigilantes, flogging, torture, incarceration, and execution. Then there was something called Spencer Line. When they realized that now, because people have been pushed to the slopes, to the ledges, and they were over-exploiting, the sources of water were at risk. The colonial administrator, who was the agricultural officer in the area, introduced his name was Spencer. He introduced something called Spencer Line, which I'll show you in some of the pictures, where you're a Keiyo, you don't go beyond here on one side and on the other side. So they were like gravitating along the slopes towards the valley floor because of the mineral interest. They were banned from going beyond that level, and up to the escarpment, they were left a line, and it's still there, that line in form of a road. Okay, some of the things that they did, they introduced cash crops, terracing, new ways of farming, which was not really welcome, but it changed people's minds towards capitalism, towards thinking about survival individualism. So even then, this same Spencer remained after the colonialism, after independence in the 1960s, about 1963, but he still remembered for the way he managed soil erosion. So there are some good things, and introduced new crops and livestock. So you see that kind of European influence now change people's ways of attitude towards social life, communal living, to individual a little bit, and again, took an interest, turned people to think of how do we make money? How do money economies came in. So this labor reservoir, which was the land reserves, was an oversupply. They saved, they learned capitalism. They learned from the settlers, the colonizers. What was the impact then? After the community was forcefully evicted for settlers to take the land and the forest land, and the remaining became too little and became hopelessly overstocked, because I said our people like the more the better animals. And land loss caused deep resentment and then the resistance started. And they were resisting and running back to hide. It led to peasant fatalism, habitat destruction. The people were desperate. They said, okay, the attitude changed, like, oh, we'll do what we can, we die, we are dying anyway. So escarpment became a convenient hideout from colonial chiefs, tax collectors, and labor recruiters. And no wonder it became a kind of a place in the view of the colonizers that's what they love to stay there. They are cliffhangers. It's not possible to live on a cliff. How can you dwell on a cliff? So the colonial the impact was weak economic, political, and social structures, and a very good dose of capitalism. So one of the impacts I mentioned is peasant fatalism. When you are unable to pay taxes now, even in the new government, farming activities extended to hanging valleys of the escarpment by the people now in the post-colonial era, in a way. The community's hopelessness, poverty, and fatalism led to loss of spiritualism. And that spiritualism was informed how environment was looked after, how food security was assured. By the 1970s, just recently, the community was reckless in land use, leading to accelerated erosion and landslides, further compounding this peasant fatalism attitude. So again, population growth, mountain slopes destroyed, struggle for survival, lasting effects of colonialism and economic degradation, livelihood, and capitalistic mindset. So entrepreneurship took root. And I have another interest. I'm working also on the entrepreneurship spirit of these people, because later on they ended up buying a lot of land from the settlers as they were living, and it occupied their homes. Many families, or some families, have now those colonial architectural homes. Of course, we don't know what to do with all the rooms, but they're there. We are using it differently, but that's a legacy that was left. Resource exploitation and mineral extraction through multinational and government structures became rampant. It became emphasized. And there was something they were calling gold rush. And it was announced that there was gold that's been found in the valley floor. So we call it gold, but later on we learned it was a fluoride. So there's a phosphor company that was there on the land, which again caused displacement, destruction of sacred places and water pollution. It has its own, that's its own area. Today I'm just telling you general a lot of the things that I'm looking at about my people. So urbanization became an outcome, small market centers, that's entrepreneurship again, agricultural innovations and commerce. That was the legacy. So let me show you this picture. If you look at this picture, these are the escarpments. This should not be occupied, but because they had been pushed and they hit there, and finally after the independence, the people were not given access back there. It was nationalized by the government or taken by the home guards or what you'd call whatever. The government allocated and said, we need Kenya as a agricultural economic, as a bedrock. The agriculture should be the bedrock of our economy. So we cannot allow peasants and small-scale peasantry to occupy good places. So people still remain there. My people still stayed there. What did they do? They went now into charcoal burning because it has a lot of money and it still goes on until now. Cultivation on steep slopes. That is the modernism. That's the impact. That's the legacy. As population increased, the market economy became very attractive. Resource extraction, environmental destruction, water pollution, hunger, poverty. An example of a hanging valley that the cliffs that was assumed people lived in, but the landslides now, the quest for land loss continues and remains a contentious political issue. It's a political question. With the population increase and the attitude of more and more and more and competition, resources, everything has been destroyed. The delicate balance of environmental ecosystem has been messed up. So landslides, even as recent as last year, when I went to research, I always go 3 times a year, sorry. Max minimum is 2 or 3 times when I get a chance to go and continue my story. So there's even one that went on last year, and I went and checked. It was very serious because overnight there was a huge flood, rain, the gullies were formed, and it swept all the way to the floor, to the valley floor, crossing roads. They would become impassable, and there are permanent roads that have been built at this time around there. So it has people submerged homes, that's for sure, destroyed crops, and left deep gullies. So campaigns to discourage cultivation are not really respected. They failed because of the competition. The people have nowhere else to go. They cannot get land. So cutting off trees, charcoal burning, anything, any speculation that you're told might be there. Like, for example, what's going on now, there's a story that there's oil, fossil oil, petroleum. So a lot of speculators are coming back from outside the community. And even those who had left the community and lived elsewhere are coming back to, again, try to take away land from the people who remained there for speculation, just in case we might get business people interested in the land. So what's the next one? So I said, so what next? I'm thinking about spiritual ecology in this perspective, how to get it back. Because spiritual ecology blends traditions with modern conservation. Probably. Any question? So probably that might work. It's encouraged now because the contemporary construction of spirituality includes spiritual elements of awareness and engagement on ecological issues. And in my culture, we worship the sun. And actually, we don't worship the sun. We are told we worship the sun. We think we worship the sun. But in my research, I found that it's not really the sun. It is the thing that pushes the sun out in the morning and takes back in the evening. So we worship, it has a name, there's a different name for it. It helps the sun come up. And so we worship it because it has never failed us. every day we are almost guaranteed that the sun will come because of that God that's behind it, that spirit. So we're thinking about how do we recognize now the critical need to address spiritual dynamics at the root of environmental degradation. Back to indigenous knowledge, back to the ways we used to do. Ecological, in fact, Christianity did not take root, just let me add that. It did not take root in my community. It didn't make sense. Even now, we are the people with the least converts. If you, even in the last 20 years ago, even now, if you say you're a Christian, people are like, what? People don't declare their Christianity or their faith in whatever it is, because it looks weird. Somehow, like, what do you mean? So ecological renewal and sustainability now is going to depend on spiritual awareness and the attitude of responsibility. And we must recognize the recreation of our sacredness and sacred sites and behaviors that honor sacredness. That means when you're destroying the slopes, when you're doing anything, you're thinking about where did we bury our people? Where are the spirits of our people? Because they're all over in the valley. You can't mess it up. You're disturbing them. Where is the medicine? What happened to the water? It's getting dry, not even a snake, which is the worst reptile. We want even the snake to have some water to drink. So we go back to the sacredness informed by our traditions. So what next? What next is to revive this rich spirituality of our community that was lost during the colonial era because of hopelessness, because of fatalism. You give up as a peasant. And it was never recovered after independence because one thing led to another one. And that's why we keep saying there's no post-colonialism. It's there, it's part of us. And we go back to worshiping the sun and calling on the thunder, the lightning, to sort out issues, land cases, because when it comes, it draws a line. Usually, when they call on it and say, okay, do this, boundary reviews, boundary problems is organized by the thunder, even now. So what's the key? Bring back community appreciation, that the Escarpment Ledge is a protector, a source of fresh water and energy, food, and a provider of everything. Yes. So again, we believe in the importance of the synergy between the spiritual world of gods and ancestors and the living world of plants, peoples, and animals. So allow me to entertain you a little bit, if it's okay. So when these are my informers we've been researching. These are sages, I can say so, very wise. This man in the middle, probably if he's very old, he's 60. But because his father belonged to a different age set, he knows a lot. So these are the people who I'm using. I have a lot of them, but this was one of the meetings I had when I went to do my research. And that's, again, around the same place. It was like, we went round and came back. We went around the valley and came back to a place where we sat and wrote. And if you have sharp eyes, you'll see me there. If you don't have sharp eyes, no worries. And then this is a picture of now the British lands. This is the area I kept describing that was taken away. Very beautiful, green, lush. This is where they settled the Boers, and they invited anybody who did not have a home, anybody of European ancestry, to come and settle here. Because you know what? The beauty is that the British agenda for Africa and all the colonial people failed miserably because the people were resilient and they were able to survive to see another day. So this is the kind of land that they did not allow them to graze. This is forest. On the left is a forest. On the right of this picture is forest. and still a forest, like thousands of acres of forest. And on the right is what they have occupied, where the white settlers have homes, how they had homes. On the left, you can see that road going into the white guys' home those days. So our people were pushed down. These are the schools that my friends, or it could have been me, but I was in the school just by the slopes, just up. Up on the right is where you are likely to see where I went to school, but on the left, it's on the valley floor. But this is modern. This is as like last year when I took these pictures. So it's still serious. Look at the overpopulation, the terracing, the cultivation of slopes, the roads on a very risky late, and these are the cliffs, the hangars, the way we're supposed to have been dwelling. It's all that. It's good. It's picturesque if you want. If you see the bottom left of these pictures, that's the Spencer line. I hope everybody can see that picture. That road is equivalent to the Spencer line. That's where it passed. So to the left of that road, you could not cross. You see where people are populated? So these people could only go to the right and then down. Can you see that? The right and then to the bottom. And if you see this waterfall, it is in a place like the cliff. A lot of people have lost their lives because they go down there to try to look for grass, to feed the animals. And by mistake, there are a lot of, if you sleep, you go all the way to the bottom and you're just collected after some days, and it still happens because that's the land that is left with. It's what is there. It's what exists. Let me see if there's another picture. That's one more. Another picture, you see animals. This is how it is. That's how it looks like. I took these pictures again last year. I was looking for the road, the soil erosion from up the escarpment. That's me again with a couple that I met while I was doing my research. So we sat and they showed me where they go to farm. So this lady lives right here, just behind herself, but she goes down the valley to farm every day. That's where their land is. What else? And that's it. The house, the right to the left corner, still exists. These are the kind of houses that the squatters, the laborers that were taken, were given. They were given a small spot like this, and that's where you live and you stay with your family as you work in the white farms. The rest is similar, overgrazing on the left. Look at that. And down the valley now you find shopping centers because of that idea I said, the mines, the minerals, and generally these are homes. These are homes. So you get the schools there. We live there. Yeah, and then just a nice picture for a change. And then what's next? I think that's the end of my presentation. If you're welcome to ask me any questions, and yes. And what did I want to add? If I think of something, I'll add. Thank you, Lois. Thank you. So that's how we are. And as I said, I have so much interest in these things and I have a lot to research on. And I use my own money. So that's why it's very slow. When you're still like trying, you don't get a lot of funding from anywhere. So it's good.